The blizzard hit Manassa, Colorado 3 days before Thanksgiving in 1884, and Olivia Carson knew with bone-deep certainty that her stepmother intended to let her starve before spring thawed the mountain passes. She stood in the kitchen doorway, her thin cotton dress doing nothing against the cold seeping through the cabin walls, watching Margaret Carson count out provisions with the precision of a miser hoarding gold. The woman's lips moved silently as she separated flour, beans, and salted pork into careful portions, and Olivia noticed how her own pile grew smaller with each passing moment until it disappeared entirely. "There is not enough for 3 mouths through winter," Margaret said without looking up, her voice flat and final as a coffin lid closing. "Your father should have thought of that before he married me and brought another burden into this house." Olivia's father had been dead 6 months now, crushed beneath a fallen tree while clearing timber. Margaret had wept prettily at the funeral, but the tears had dried before the first shovel of dirt hit the pine box. Now the older woman stood in the kitchen of what had been Olivia's childhood home, dividing food as though her stepdaughter were already a ghost. "I can work," Olivia said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I can earn my keep." "Work where? Doing what?" Margaret's laugh was sharp as breaking ice. "There is nothing in this town for a girl with no skills and no prospects. My sister and I will make do with what we have. You will have to find your own way." Olivia's hands clenched in the worn fabric of her skirt. She was 19 years old, alone except for a stepmother who despised her, in a town buried under 3 feet of snow with more falling every hour. The nearest settlement was 30 miles through mountain passes that would not clear until April. She had 2 dresses, both threadbare, a pair of boots with holes in the soles, and exactly 17 cents to her name. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, climbed the narrow stairs to the tiny room under the eaves that had been hers since childhood, and sat on the edge of her bed. Through the small window, she could see Main Street disappearing into white nothing. The wind howled like something dying, and snow piled against the glass in drifts that would soon cover it entirely. That night, Margaret served dinner for herself and her sister Constance, who had arrived 2 weeks earlier and taken over Olivia's father's bedroom. The smell of fried pork and biscuits drifted up through the floorboards, making Olivia's stomach clench with hunger. She had not eaten since the previous morning, when she had finished the last of the bread she had hidden in her room. She waited until the house fell silent, then crept downstairs in darkness. The kitchen was locked. Margaret had installed a bolt on the inside and taken the key. Olivia stood in the cold hallway, feeling fear settle into her bones alongside the hunger. She could not break down the door without alerting the household, and even if she could, where would she go? Every home in Manassa was struggling to survive the winter. No one had extra food to spare for a desperate girl. The next morning, she put on both her dresses, one over the other, wrapped herself in the quilt from her bed, and walked into town through snow that came up to her knees. The cold burned her lungs with every breath, and her feet were numb before she reached the end of her street, but she forced herself forward. There had to be something, someone, some way to survive until spring. The general store was closed, shuttered tight against the storm. The saloon looked open, smoke rising from its chimney, but Olivia knew what awaited girls desperate enough to walk through those doors. She passed the church, the schoolhouse, the blacksmith's forge, all silent and dark. Most of the town was hunkered down to wait out the blizzard, and those who were not had no interest in helping her. She was about to turn back, defeated, when she saw smoke rising from the barn behind the livery stable. The large double doors were closed, but a smaller side entrance stood slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see the warm glow of a fire. Olivia hesitated. She was not a thief, had never taken anything that did not belong to her, but the cold was eating through her layers of clothing, and the hunger had become a living thing gnawing at her insides. Just a few minutes of warmth, she told herself, just enough to stop the shaking. She slipped through the door into blessed heat. The barn was larger than it looked from outside, with stalls lining both walls and a hayloft overhead. A pot-bellied stove sat in the center of the space, radiating warmth, and near it, a man crouched over a saddle, working oil into the leather with steady, practiced movements. He looked up as the door creaked, and Olivia found herself staring into the darkest eyes she had ever seen, set in a face that might have been carved from the same mountains that surrounded the town. He was young, perhaps 25, with black hair that fell past his collar and the kind of sun-weathered skin that came from years of outdoor work. "Door does not latch right," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Wind must have blown it open." It was an offering, an excuse, a way for her to leave without acknowledging what she had been doing. Olivia knew she should take it, should murmur an apology and slip back into the cold, but her legs would not move. The warmth was too precious, too necessary. "I am sorry," she said instead. "I did not mean to intrude." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her pinched face, the two dresses, the quilt clutched around her shoulders. Then he set down the saddle and stood, and she realized he was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of lean, muscular build that came from hard physical labor. "You are shaking," he said simply. "Sit by the fire." "I should not." "Why not?" Because it would be improper, because she did not know him, because accepting kindness felt dangerous when she had nothing to offer in return. But the words stuck in her throat, and he was already pulling over a wooden crate and placing it near the stove. "Sit," he said again, gentler this time. "No one should be out in this cold." Olivia sat. The heat from the stove washed over her like a benediction, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying at the relief of it. The man returned to his saddle, working in silence, and after a few minutes she felt brave enough to speak. "Do you work here? I own it. Bought it 6 months ago from old Tom Fletcher when his lungs gave out." He glanced up at her. "Name is James Kincaid. Most folks call me Kincaid. Olivia Carson." Recognition flickered across his face. "George Carson's daughter. You knew my father. He bought his draft horses from me. Good man. I was sorry to hear about his passing." Kincaid set down his rag and stood, walking to a shelf near the back of the barn. He returned with a tin cup and a battered coffee pot that had been warming on the stove. "Coffee." The smell alone made Olivia's eyes water. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and accepted the cup with hands that still trembled from cold. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, unsweetened and bitter, but it was hot and wet, and she drank it like it was salvation. Kincaid watched her drain the cup, then refilled it without comment. When she had finished the second cup, he disappeared into what looked like a tack room and returned with a thick sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "I am not hungry," Olivia said, the lie obvious in the way her eyes fixed on the food. "Then I will just have to throw it out," Kincaid said mildly. "Made it this morning, but I already ate my fill. Hate to see good food go to waste." He set the sandwich on the crate beside her and returned to his saddle. After a moment, Olivia picked it up with shaking hands and took a bite. Roast beef, thick slices of it, with sharp cheese and mustard between slabs of fresh bread. She had to force herself to eat slowly, to chew properly, when every instinct screamed at her to devour it in 3 bites. Kincaid did not watch her eat, but she sensed his awareness of her, the way he kept his movements slow and unthreatening, giving her space to finish the meal without shame. When the last crumb was gone, she folded the wax paper carefully and set it aside. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You live with Margaret Carson now." It was not a question, and the flatness in his tone told her he knew exactly what kind of woman her stepmother was. Olivia looked down at her hands, roughened from years of housework, and nodded. "She keeping you fed?" The directness of the question startled her into honesty. "No," Kincaid's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "How long?" She locked the kitchen yesterday. Said there was not enough for 3 mouths through winter. 3 mouths. Her and that sister of hers, I suppose. Yes. Kincaid stood abruptly, pacing to the barn door and back, energy radiating off him like heat from the stove. "That woman," he said, biting off each word, "inherited your father's house, his land, everything he worked for, and she will not even feed his daughter through winter. There is nothing I can do about it. There is plenty I can do about it." He stopped pacing, fixing those dark eyes on her. "You come here every day at noon, I will have a meal ready, and I will have a word with Margaret Carson about her Christian duty." "Please do not," Olivia said quickly. "It will only make things worse." Worse than starving, she had no answer for that. Kincaid shook his head, then walked back to the tack room and emerged with a heavy wool coat, worn but serviceable. "Take this. You cannot walk around in 2 dresses and a quilt." "I cannot accept it." "Why not? I have 3 coats. One man does not need 3 coats." He held it out to her. "Take it, Olivia." The sound of her name in his deep voice did something strange to her chest, made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with hunger or cold. She stood, letting the quilt fall, and he helped her into the coat. It was far too large, hanging past her knees and swallowing her hands, but it was warm and smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke. "Thank you," she whispered. "Noon tomorrow," he said firmly. "Do not make me come looking for you." Olivia nodded and slipped back out into the cold, but this time the wind did not cut quite so deep, and she had enough food in her belly to make it home without stumbling. The next day, she returned at noon. Kincaid was waiting with beef stew, thick with vegetables and potatoes and more of that bitter coffee. He asked her about her father, about her life before Margaret, and she found herself talking more than she had in months, the words spilling out in the warm safety of the barn. The day after that, he had roasted chicken and biscuits with butter. The day after that, pork chops and fried potatoes. Each day she arrived at noon and stayed for an hour, eating and talking while Kincaid worked on tack or tended to the horses in his care. She learned that he had come to Manassa 2 years ago from Wyoming, that he had worked as a ranch hand until he had saved enough to buy the livery stable, that he lived in the small apartment above the barn and did all his own cooking. He was quiet and careful with words, but when he spoke it was with a thoughtfulness that made her listen, and she felt something growing between them, something warm and fragile and terrifying. The way his face softened when she walked through the door. The way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched. The way silence felt comfortable instead of awkward, companionable instead of empty. 2 weeks into the arrangement, Margaret confronted her. Olivia had just returned from the barn, her stomach full and her spirits higher than they had been in months, when her stepmother appeared at the top of the stairs like a vengeful spirit. "Where have you been?" "Walking," Olivia said. "Walking where?" "I saw you coming from the direction of town." "Just walking." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You have been eating, I can tell. Where are you getting food?" Olivia lifted her chin. "Does it matter? You made it clear you would not provide for me. I am providing for myself." "By whoring yourself out, no doubt. What man is giving you handouts, girl?" "Who are you spreading your legs for?" The words hit like a slap, and Olivia felt her face burn. "I am not. That is a vile thing to say." "Is it? Then how are you eating?" Margaret descended the stairs, backing Olivia against the wall. "Tell me where you have been going, or I will lock you in your room until you decide to be honest. I have been going to the livery stable. James Kincaid has been feeding me, and before you say another filthy word, he has been nothing but kind and respectful." Margaret's laugh was like nails on slate. Kind, respectful. Men are never kind without expecting something in return. How long before he demands payment for all those meals, him? How long before he expects you to earn your keep on your back? He is not like that. They are all like that. Margaret leaned in close, her breath hot on Olivia's face. "But perhaps it is for the best. Perhaps you can trap him into marriage, and then you will be his problem instead of mine. Just do not come crying to me when you realize what kind of bargain you have made." She swept away, leaving Olivia shaking with anger and shame. That night, she lay awake wondering if Margaret was right. Was Kincaid feeding her out of genuine kindness, or was he waiting for her to feel indebted enough to give him what he wanted? The next day, she almost did not go to the barn. But hunger won over fear, and at noon she slipped through the side door to find Kincaid stirring something on the stove. "You are late," he said without turning around. "I was about to come looking for you." "I am sorry." He glanced at her and frowned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing, Olivia." The gentle insistence in his voice broke something open inside her. "My stepmother thinks I am selling myself to you for food." Kincaid went very still. Then he set down the spoon and turned to face her fully. "What did she say exactly?" "It does not matter. It matters to me." Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the barn. "She said men are never kind without expecting something in return. She said you would eventually demand payment. She said I should trap you into marriage so I would be your problem instead of hers." "And what do you think?" The question caught her off guard. She looked up at him, at the steady dark eyes and the careful stillness of his posture, and realized he was giving her room to doubt him, space to question his motives without taking offense. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are the first person in a very long time who has treated me like I matter, and I do not know what to do with that." Something shifted in Kincaid's expression, a softening around the eyes. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as though remembering to maintain distance. "Your stepmother is partly right," he said. "Men are rarely kind without reason, but the reason is not always what she thinks." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I am feeding you because the thought of you going hungry makes me angry in a way I cannot quite explain. I am feeding you because your father was a good man who deserved better than to have his daughter starved by the woman who inherited his home. And I am feeding you because every time you walk through that door, I feel something I have not felt in a very long time." Olivia's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What do you feel?" "Hope," he said simply. "The possibility of something good in a world that is mostly hard and cold. I am not expecting anything from you, Olivia. I am not waiting for payment or looking to trap you. I am just feeding you because I want you to survive the winter, and maybe because I want you to keep coming back." She crossed the distance between them without conscious thought, and he caught her hands in his calloused palms warm against her cold fingers. "I want to keep coming back," she whispered. "Then do." He lifted one hand to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek with aching gentleness. "Come back every day. Let me make sure you never go hungry, and when spring comes, if you want to leave, I will help you. If you want to stay, I will be glad of it. But right now, today, just let me feed you." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he smiled. It transformed his face, chasing away the severity and replacing it with warmth that made her breath catch. "Good," he said. "Now sit down before this stew burns." They ate together that day, sitting on crates near the stove, and Kincaid told her about growing up in Wyoming on a ranch so remote that they saw other people only twice a year. She told him about her mother, who had died when she was 8, about the loneliness of growing up with only her taciturn father for company, about the shock of his remarriage just 6 months before his death. He was lonely, she said. After Mama died, he worked himself nearly to death trying not to feel it. When Margaret came to town, pretty and young and interested in him, I think he could not believe his luck. He married her 3 weeks after they met. Did you like her? I did not know her well enough to like or dislike her. She was pleasant enough before the wedding. After. Olivia shrugged. After, she made it clear I was in the way. She wanted a home and security, not a nearly grown stepdaughter. When Papa died, she stopped pretending. She has no legal obligation to care for you, Kincaid said. You are over 18. But morally, ethically, she should not be throwing you out to starve. She is not throwing me out, she just will not feed me. Same thing in the middle of winter. Olivia could not argue with that. She finished her stew in silence, and when she rose to leave, Kincaid stopped her with a hand on her arm. If it ever becomes too much, he said, if you ever feel unsafe in that house, you come here. Day or night, I do not care. You come here and I will figure something out. I cannot just move in with you. The scandal would. I do not care about scandal. I care about you being safe. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. Instead, she squeezed his hand and promised to be careful. The winter deepened, and snow piled so high against the buildings that people had to tunnel through drifts to reach the street. Temperatures plummeted until the cold was a physical presence, something that could kill as surely as a bullet. The town hunkered down and waited for spring, and Olivia went to the barn every day at noon. She and Kincaid fell into a rhythm. He cooked, she helped clean up after, and they talked. Sometimes they barely spoke at all, simply sharing the comfortable silence of two people who enjoyed each other's company. She learned that he read poetry, that he had a weakness for peppermint candy, that he had once broken his arm falling off a horse and still had a crook in his left wrist. He learned that she could sketch, that she loved thunderstorms, that she had always wanted to see the ocean. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning strike of passion. It was the slow accumulation of shared meals and quiet conversations, the gentle brush of hands as they passed dishes, the way he always made sure she took the warmest seat by the stove. It was the way she found herself thinking about him when she was alone in her cold room, the way her day did not feel complete until she had seen his face. One afternoon in late January, a month after she had first stumbled into his barn, Kincaid asked her to stay for dinner. I know you usually leave by 1, he said, but I thought maybe tonight you could stay longer. I could make something special. Olivia knew what he was really asking. Staying for dinner meant being in the barn after dark, meant risking her reputation in a way that lunch somehow did not. It meant acknowledging that this was more than a charitable arrangement, that something real was growing between them. I would like that, she said. His smile was like sunrise, and that evening he made roasted venison with potatoes and carrots, and a dried apple pie that tasted like heaven. They ate by lamplight, the barn warm and golden around them, and afterward he walked her home through snow that sparkled under a full moon. At the gate of her father's house, he took both her hands in his. Olivia, he said, and then stopped as though unsure how to continue. Yes. I know it has only been a month. I know it is too soon and you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to know that this is not charity. It has not been charity for a while now. He took a breath. I am courting you, or trying to anyway. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I would like to keep courting you properly. Joy and terror warred in her chest. What do you feel? Like I would fight a blizzard bare-handed to keep you safe. Like I've been waiting my whole life for you to walk through that barn door. Like I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life and make you breakfast. She laughed, a shaky sound that was half sob. That is quite a lot of feeling. Too much. No. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Not too much, just right actually. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent, and bent his head to kiss her. It was gentle and sweet and tasted like apple pie and promises, and when he pulled back his eyes were bright with something that looked like wonder. "So you will let me court you?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." After that, everything changed. Kincaid was openly courting her now, and the whole town knew it. Some people smiled and nodded approval. Others whispered behind their hands, speculating about what the livery owner saw in George Carson's penniless daughter. Margaret was apoplectic. She cornered Olivia in the upstairs hallway 2 days after that first kiss, her face mottled with rage. "You little fool," she hissed. "You think he will actually marry you? He is using you, and when he is done you will be ruined and unemployable, good for nothing but washing floors in a brothel." "He is not using me. He cares about me. He cares about having a warm body in his bed. The moment he gets what he wants, he will toss you aside like garbage." Olivia met her stepmother's eyes steadily. "You are wrong about him. And even if you were right, I would rather take my chances with Kincaid than spend another day under this roof." "Fine. Then get out. Get out now tonight and do not come back." Margaret, she is George's daughter, Constance appeared at the top of the stairs, her round face anxious. "She is nothing to me," Margaret whirled on her sister. "She is eating food that should be ours, taking up space we could be using. If she has somewhere else to go, let her go." Olivia did not wait to hear more. She climbed to her room, packed her few belongings into a carpet bag, and walked out into the February darkness. Snow was falling again, fat flakes that caught in her hair and eyelashes, and the temperature was dropping fast. But she did not look back. The barn was dark when she arrived, but she could see lamplight in the windows of the apartment above. She climbed the exterior stairs and knocked, shivering in the cold. Kincaid opened the door in shirt sleeves, his hair damp as though he had just washed. He took one look at her standing there with her carpet bag and stepped aside without a word. The apartment was small but tidy, one room divided into sleeping, cooking, and living areas. A fire crackled in a small stove, and the warmth hit her like a wall. "What happened?" Kincaid asked, taking her bag and setting it aside. "Margaret threw me out. I am sorry. I know I should not have come here, but I had nowhere else. Stop." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tension drain out of her as she leaned into his solid warmth. "You can always come here. Always." "I told you that. People will talk. Let them talk." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "Are you all right?" "I am now." He made her sit by the fire while he heated soup left over from dinner, and she ate slowly, feeling the fear and adrenaline drain away. When she was finished, he spread blankets and a pillow on the floor near the stove. "You take the bed," he said. "I will sleep down here." "I cannot take your bed, Olivia." His voice was gentle but firm. "You are exhausted, you have been through hell, and you are sleeping in a proper bed tonight. Do not argue with me." She was too tired to argue. She crawled into his bed, which smelled like him, like leather and wood smoke and something indefinably masculine, and fell asleep almost instantly. The next morning she woke to the smell of frying bacon and strong coffee. Kincaid was at the stove cooking breakfast, his hair tied back with a strip of leather. "Good morning," he said when he saw she was awake. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," he smiled. "Good. I hope you are hungry." They ate together, bacon and eggs and toast with butter, and afterward he helped her wash the dishes in a basin of heated water. It felt domestic and comfortable, like they had been doing this for years instead of hours. "I have been thinking," Kincaid said, drying a plate carefully. You cannot stay here long-term without people assuming things. But if we were engaged, if we announced our intention to marry, it would be different. Still a bit scandalous, maybe, but acceptable enough. Olivia's hand stilled in the dishwater. Are you proposing? Not very well, apparently. He set down the plate and turned to face her. I am saying that I want to marry you. I have wanted it since that first day when you walked into the barn looking like a frozen sparrow. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a month, but I also know what I feel. And if you feel even a portion of the same thing, I would be honored if you would be my wife. She turned to look at him, this quiet man with dark eyes and gentle hands who had saved her life in more ways than one. I do not have a dowry. I do not have anything to bring to a marriage except myself. You are all I want. I cannot cook as well as you can. I am terrible at mending. I am stubborn and I talk too much when I am nervous. Olivia. He caught her soapy hands in his. Are you trying to talk me out of proposing? I am trying to make sure you know what you are getting. I am getting a woman who is brave enough to walk through a blizzard to survive. A woman who sketches in the margins of old newspapers and loves thunderstorms. A woman who makes me laugh and makes me want to be better than I am. That is what I am getting. He squeezed her hands. Now, will you marry me or not? She laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed her then, properly, deeply, and she felt the last of her fear fall away. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on Main Street, with half the town in attendance despite the continuing cold. Olivia wore a dress borrowed from the minister's wife, pale blue wool with lace at the collar, and Kincaid wore his only suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion. He slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, and she promised the same. Margaret did not attend. Olivia had not expected her to, but it still stung a little to look out at the assembled guests and see the deliberate absence. Constance came, though, sitting in the back pew and crying quietly throughout the ceremony. Afterward, she pressed a small package into Olivia's hands. Your mother's locket, she whispered. I found it in Margaret's drawer. She was going to sell it, but it should be yours. Olivia clutched the package to her chest, tears pricking her eyes. Thank you. I am sorry, Constance said. I should have stood up to her more. I should have helped you. It is all right. I am all right now. And she was. More than all right. She was married to a good man who loved her. She had a home and a future, and she would never go hungry again. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Kincaid's apartment was small, and they learned to navigate around each other in the limited space. He was up before dawn to tend the horses and open the livery, and she learned to wake with him, to make coffee and breakfast while he dressed. She took over the cleaning and laundry, and he taught her to cook properly, standing behind her at the stove and guiding her hands through the steps of making bread. At night, they lay in bed and talked about the future. Kincaid wanted to expand the livery, maybe buy some land and raise horses. Olivia wanted to start a small business, sewing and mending for the townspeople. They made plans and dreamed aloud, and when words failed they communicated in touches and kisses, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they brought to everything else. Spring came slowly to Manassa, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the brown earth beneath. As the passes cleared and travel became possible again, news filtered in from surrounding towns. The winter had been hard everywhere, crops had failed, and many families were struggling. One morning in early May, Constance appeared at the livery. She looked thinner than Olivia remembered, her face drawn with worry. Margaret is sick, she said without preamble. She has been coughing for weeks and now she has a fever. I do not know what to do. Olivia felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Anger, yes, for what Margaret had done to her, but also pity because she knew what it was like to be sick and scared with no one to help. "Have you called the doctor?" She says we cannot afford it. She says we need to save the money. Kincaid appeared from the barn, taking in the situation at a glance. "Go," he said to Olivia. "If you want to help her, go help her. I will be here when you get back." "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Whatever you decide, I will support it." Olivia went. She found Margaret in bed, her face flushed with fever, coughing wetly into a handkerchief. The house was cold, the fire in the stove burned down to embers, and Constance looked exhausted. "What are you doing here?" Margaret croaked when she saw Olivia. "Your sister came to get me." "You need a doctor." "I do not need anything from you, maybe not, but I am going to help anyway." Olivia turned to Constance. "Go rest. I will sit with her." She spent the day tending to Margaret, keeping the fire going, making broth, wiping the sweat from her stepmother's face when the fever spiked. It was not easy, and Margaret was not gracious about accepting help, but Olivia did it anyway. Not because she owed the woman anything, but because it was the right thing to do. The doctor came that evening, called by Kincaid, who had paid for the visit without being asked. He examined Margaret, diagnosed pneumonia, and left medicine with instructions for care. Over the next week, Olivia split her time between the livery and her father's house, nursing Margaret back to health. One afternoon, when the fever had broken and Margaret was sitting up in bed, the older woman finally spoke. "Why are you helping me?" Olivia considered her answer carefully. "Because you are sick and you need help, and because I loved my father and he loved you, and that has to count for something. I was cruel to you. Yes, you were. I could say I am sorry, but I do not think you would believe me." "Probably not," Olivia agreed. "But maybe in time we could find a way to be civil to each other. For Constance's sake, if nothing else." Margaret nodded slowly. "Civil. I can manage civil." It was not forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a beginning. As Margaret recovered, Olivia gradually returned to her life with Kincaid, and the tension that had knotted her shoulders since her father's death finally began to ease. Summer bloomed across the Colorado mountains, bringing wildflowers and warm winds. The livery thrived, and Kincaid hired a young man to help with the workload. Olivia started taking in sewing, first just small repairs for neighbors, then larger commissions. She discovered she had a talent for tailoring, for taking measurements and creating clothes that fit perfectly. One evening in late June, she realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Kincaid over dinner. He went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor." He set down the fork carefully, then pushed back from the table and pulled her into his lap. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can hardly breathe. Yes, I am happy." They went to the doctor the next day, who confirmed what Olivia already knew. She was expecting, due sometime in late February or early March. Kincaid walked around for days with a dazed smile on his face and began making plans to expand the apartment to include a nursery. The pregnancy was not easy. Olivia was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down, and Kincaid fretted over her like a mother hen. He made her ginger tea and bland crackers, held her hair when she vomited, and never once complained about the burden. As the sickness faded and her belly began to swell, his wonder only grew. He would place his hands on her stomach and talk to the baby, telling stories about horses and mountains and the life they would build together. Fall came, painting the aspens gold and crimson. Olivia's business had grown enough that she had to turn away customers, focusing only on the work she could complete before the baby came. Kincaid was as busy as ever, but he always made time for her, rubbing her aching back and feet, reading to her in the evenings. In November, Margaret came to visit. She looked healthier than she had in months, and she brought a package wrapped in brown paper. "I made this," she said awkwardly, handing it to Olivia. "For the baby." Olivia unwrapped it to find a tiny quilt, beautifully stitched in shades of blue and yellow. "This is lovely, thank you." "I was not kind to you," Margaret said. "I cannot undo that, but I can try to be a better person going forward if you will let me." "I would like that," Olivia said softly. It was another step toward healing, toward building something new from the wreckage of what had been. Margaret did not become a warm or affectionate stepmother, but she was civil, and sometimes that was enough. Winter came again, but this time Olivia was warm and safe and well-fed. She spent her days sewing small clothes for the baby and her nights in Kincaid's arms, planning for the future. They had expanded the apartment, adding a small room that would serve as a nursery, and Kincaid had built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was soft as silk. In late February, on a night when the wind howled and snow fell in sheets, Olivia's labor began. Kincaid fetched the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing the main room of the apartment while Olivia labored in the bedroom. It was long and difficult and painful, and there were moments when Olivia thought she might not survive it. But Mrs. Henderson was skilled and patient, and finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, a thin wail filled the apartment. "A boy, Mrs. Henderson announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. Small but healthy, with a good set of lungs. Kincaid was allowed in then, and he crossed to the bed where Olivia lay exhausted and triumphant, the baby in her arms. He looked down at his son, at the tiny scrunched face and waving fists, and tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." They named him Thomas, after Kincaid's father and George for Olivia's. Thomas George Kincaid, born at dawn on a snowy February morning, loved from his first breath. The months that followed were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Thomas was a fussy baby, prone to colic and midnight crying, and both Olivia and Kincaid walked through those early months in a fog of sleeplessness. But when Thomas smiled for the first time at 6 weeks, when he laughed at 3 months, when he took his first tottering steps at 10 months, every hard moment was worth it. Olivia's sewing business had grown enough that she was able to hire an assistant, a young woman named Sarah who had a deft hand with a needle. Kincaid's livery was thriving, and he had purchased a small parcel of land just outside town where he planned to raise horses. They were building a life, piece by careful piece, and it was everything Olivia had never dared to dream of. When Thomas was 18 months old, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1888 she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Kincaid's mother. Catherine was a placid baby, content to lie in her cradle and watch the world with solemn, dark eyes that looked just like her father's. Margaret had become a regular visitor by then, stopping by once a week to see the children. She was not demonstrative, but she brought small gifts and sometimes held Catherine while Olivia worked. It was not the relationship Olivia had with her own mother, but it was something, and she was grateful for it. Years passed in a blur of work and family. Thomas grew into a serious little boy who loved horses and followed his father around the livery like a shadow. Catherine was sunny and bright, always laughing, always getting into mischief. Kincaid expanded his horse breeding operation, developing a reputation for quality animals, and Olivia's tailoring business became one of the most successful in town. In 1891, When Thomas was 4 and Catherine was 3, they moved into a house of their own. It was modest, just 5 rooms, but it had a proper kitchen and a yard where the children could play. Kincaid built a workshop behind the house where Olivia could sew, and planted a garden that flourished under her care. One evening that first summer in the new house, after the children were asleep and the dishes were washed, Kincaid and Olivia sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "You remember the first time you walked into my barn?" Kincaid asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I was half frozen and starving, not my most dignified moment. You were the bravest thing I had ever seen, this tiny, stubborn woman who refused to give up even when everything was stacked against her." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I fell in love with you that day, I think. Or maybe the day after when you came back despite being terrified. I fell in love with you when you handed me that sandwich and pretended you did not want it. You were so careful not to make me feel ashamed." She laced her fingers through his. "You saved my life. You saved mine right back. I was half alive before you, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose. You gave me a family." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the house, one of the children whimpered in their sleep, then settled. An owl called from the trees beyond the yard, and the first stars appeared overhead. "I am happy," Olivia said softly. "I did not know I could be this happy." "Neither did I." Kincaid pulled her closer. "But I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." And he did. Through the years that followed, through the birth of 2 more children, through droughts and hard winters and all the challenges that came with building a life in the mountains, Kincaid kept his promise. He made sure Olivia never went hungry, never felt alone, never doubted for a moment that she was loved. They grew old together in that house on the edge of Manassa, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Thomas took over the horse breeding operation and expanded it into the finest in Colorado. Catherine married a banker and moved to Denver but came home every summer with her growing brood of children. The 2 younger children, Michael and Anna, stayed in Manassa and ran the tailoring business that Olivia had built. Margaret lived to see her 82nd birthday, and in her final months she apologized properly to Olivia for the cruelty of that long-ago winter. Olivia forgave her because holding on to anger was exhausting, and life was too short for grudges. When Margaret died, Olivia and Constance buried her next to George Carson, and Olivia planted roses on the grave. Kincaid and Olivia celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1936, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They had the party in the barn where they had first met, which Thomas had carefully preserved even as the livery business moved to a larger facility. There was music and dancing and a cake tall enough to feed the whole town, and when Kincaid took Olivia in his arms for the first waltz, she felt 18 again. 50 years, he said, holding her close, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where I was a penniless orphan eating your food, especially that part. That is where our story started." "No," Olivia said, smiling up at him. "That is where our life started. The story began before, in all the choices and chances that brought us to that moment. But the life, the real life, started when you handed me that sandwich and decided to care. Then here is to 50 more years of life," Kincaid said, spinning her slowly around the barn floor. They did not get 50 more years. Time, relentless and impartial, caught up with them eventually. But they got 20. And those 20 years were full of joy and grandchildren and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. When Kincaid died at 79, peaceful in his sleep with Olivia's hand in his, she grieved deeply, but without regret. They had built something real and lasting together, something that would continue long after they were both gone. Olivia lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, still sewing almost until the end. On her last day, with her children gathered around her bed, she smiled and spoke her final words. "I am going to see your father now. Tell him I am coming and that I never went hungry, not once in all these years. He kept his promise." She closed her eyes and slipped away quietly, and they buried her next to Kincaid in the cemetery on the hill above town. The headstone was simple. Olivia Kincaid, beloved wife and mother, who was never afraid to walk through the cold in search of warmth. And in Manassa, for generations after, people told the story of the cowboy who fed a starving girl one winter, and the love that grew from that simple act of kindness. It became a legend, embellished and romanticized with each telling, but at its heart it remained true. Sometimes in the darkest moments, salvation comes not from grand gestures but from small acts of decency. A cup of coffee, a sandwich, a place by the fire. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, those small acts grow into something that lasts forever.